in a very exclusive school with students from a very exclusive neighborhood. A teacher asked her students to write an essay on poverty. And one little girl began her composition like this. Once there was a poor little girl. Her father was poor, her mother was poor, her nanny was poor, her butler was poor, her chauffeur was poor. In fact, everybody in the house was very poor. I'm glad you laughed. Our lesson today from the little book of James, just 4 quick chapters, carries a very blunt message. James is warning about showing preference, or as you heard, favoritism to those who display signs of good fortune. If you show special attention, he writes, to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here is a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You stand over there," or "Sit at my feet." Have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? As Christians, we all find ourselves from time to time unfairly judging others. We make judgments about people based on their clothes, their color, their culture, their hair, their size. We show favoritism to those who seem to have more money or designer clothes or bigger houses or expensive cars. We make judgments all the time. And we also, at the same time, it's very interesting, we strive to be like them, to climb a ladder of wealth and financial success. But in the end, even if we make it to the top of that ladder, we often find it's against the wrong wall. We're fortunate that James, who many believe was the brother of Jesus and the leader of the Jerusalem Council when Paul made his plea to accept the Gentiles, we're pleased that he wrote this letter. It may have been one of the first written pieces in the time of the New Testament. And we need these warnings today, just as they needed them then, these teachings, because we are so influenced as they were by culture, by the way we're raised, by the examples that we've all been given. In James' community, it was a community of Jewish Christians, and they were being asked to accept Gentiles into their midst. We are asked, too, to accept people we're not sure about sometimes. And then we hear the words of James, who contends that faith produces authentic deeds. In other words, if those who call themselves God's people truly belong to God, their lives will match their faith. But there isn't one person that isn't here today that makes judgments about people. We do it all the time. It's just a natural part of who we are as human beings. We make judgments by people's appearance, by sizing up their checkbook. We make judgments about people's education. And there is also one person here that doesn't know that that's wrong. We all know it's wrong. And we all know that it's hypocritical and opposed to Christian teaching. Yet, as the human beings that we are, we still do it. Jesus taught long ago, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. He also set up the royal law to love one another as we love ourselves. We are called to act with integrity, to act as we believe, to love all people. A couple started attending a very large community church, and they were enjoying services there. And after church one Sunday, they were driving out of the parking lot when they saw that someone had their hood up and that it looked like they needed their battery jumped. And so they pulled in beside them and attempted to jump the car with their battery. In the meantime, while they were doing this, there were people that came by honking and yelling and screaming at them because they were blocking the driveway out just a little bit too much. When they finished helping their friend with their car, They said, we don't want to go there anymore if that's what those church people are like. What happens in the parking lot, what happens outside these four walls is the essence and the validity of our faith. What happens outside the worship service is more important than what we say in here. It's how we live our faith that's important. Last week, we talked about how faith is not abstract proposition, but has effects in the real world. We noted how James is very practical in his writing and in his philosophy, and everything he wrote illustrates this point, that faith helps us to endure trials, calls upon God for wisdom, helps us to bridle our tongue when we find mean words coming to the tip. Faith sets aside wickedness and visits the orphan and widows, and faith, as Colleen reminded us through the children's sermon, does not play on favoritism. James stressed that the life of faith is comprehensive, impacting every area of our lives and driving us to truly engage in the lives of others in a way that shows an integrity of belief and action. Our spiritual maturity begins with the realization that regardless of the differences that may be between us, our faith can open our eyes to see beauty rather than judgment, to see beauty in those differences. And there is so much that can be learned from those differences. There's a broadening enrichment that can come to us when we learn to celebrate and tolerate, to question, and to learn from those who see the world from a different perspective. Understand, though, that the world will always try to drive a wedge between us, to insist that we only see the differences and not the beauty, that we judge one another instead of love one another. We recognize as people of faith that the way of Christ is different. It is the way of love, the way of mercy, the way of compassion, the way of forgiveness. And acting with integrity means matching our faith with actions that say we are people who do love, who have compassion. But everyone around us, all our family, our friends, our neighbors, will come to a point of judging you for your own kindnesses in the face of anger, judging you for the love that you show in the face of perhaps hatred, judging you for your acceptance in the face of prejudice and compassion in the face of fear. So I leave you with this challenge, and I do recognize it as a challenge. Do something great with your faith this week. Act with integrity. Begin by engaging each person with whom you meet as though this person is the richest in the world. The mail carrier, the grocery clerk, the parking attendant, the waiter, the restaurant server, the insolent teenager. Practice tolerance when you engage in conversation with those whose values and opinions are different than yours. Practice patience. Listen attentively and compassionately. Pursue a life of faith. Act with integrity. Amen.